Welcome back to Art Trippin, the lecture series. In this video, we will talk about secular art. I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and I'm an art historian, and this is Art Trippin lecture series.
Hi, I'm Dr. Megan Lorraine Debin, and this is Art Trippin.
Now, the first image I want to look at is Andrea Mantegna's Lamentation over the Dead Christ from 1466. This is another example of early Italian Renaissance art from the Quattrocento, the 1400s. Here we see Jesus after he has been taken down from the cross and laid to rest in the tomb. And you see these two figures sort of kneeling down before him, crying over, his death. You can also see that Mantegna, the artist, has paid a great deal of attention to depicting the torso, the ribs, the muscles, the wounds in the hands and the feet of Christ. And we see Andrea's attempt to create what we call foreshortening. We have this sense of this figure receding back into space and this foreshortening where these feet are coming towards us. And we saw that in the last video. If you didn't see the last video, go back and watch Madonna on the Rocks by Leonardo da Vinci, where Mary's hand is foreshortened. And here we see Andrea Mantegna practicing this foreshortening. Now, a lot of scholars say actually, if he really was depicting the foreshortening correctly, the feet would appear a little bit bigger and the head would appear a little bit smaller because it's further away. But perhaps Mantegna didn't find that a very dignified depiction of Christ. Now, who is Andrea Mantegna? I want to tell you about Andrea Mantegna because he painted this fabulous room called the Camera dei Sposi, or the Camera Picta. Camera Picta means painted room in Italian. You might also see this called Camera dei Sposi, or the room of the bride and groom, or the room of the couples. And this is in the Duke's Palace in Mantova. This is dated to 1465 to 1474, so it took him 9 years to paint all of the walls and ceiling of this room for the patron Ludovico Gonzaga. This painting is a triumph of illusionistic painting. I mean, he has painted onto the ceiling these architectural features that actually look like they are carved out of marble, and it's all painted onto this flat surface. What do we see depicted in the Camera Picta by Andrea Mantegna? Well, we see a court scene. We see Ludovico Gonzaga receiving news from his son, and he is seated with his wife and some of their children, as well as other members of the court. So we see a depiction of courtly life, hanging out at the court, talking about politics. You will also see some wonderful little details. You will see a piece of fabric that has been pulled away to give us a sense that we've walked into this scene. You will see a little person, which was typical of a Renaissance court. And underneath the chair of the patron, Ludovico Gonzaga, who's the gentleman, he kind of looks like Putin in the pink dress, underneath his chair you see his dog. You see the family dog. I love all of these little details of Andrea Mantegna's Camera Picta. Part of why Ludovico Gonzaga wanted to commission this artwork is that he was not high-born like his wife. So his wife was born in the class of nobility, but Gonzaga instead earned his money. He gained his money, so it's kind of new rich. So he is wanting to make sure that he is making visible that he is connected to this noble wife. So he brings the money, she brings the name, and this is a sort of perfect match in 15th century Mantova. You will also see on display some of the family's marriageable daughters. So this is also how portraiture was used in the Renaissance. Portraits were sent to possible suitors as families attempted to make marriage alliances, and marriage alliances were political in 15th century Italy. On another wall in this room, you see kind of a hunting scene. You see Gonzaga and his family and his son sort of going off to travel, and then you see this ceiling that is all painted in this optical illusion effect. If you look up, you see what appears to be an oculus that opens up to the sky, kind of like the oculus in the Pantheon in Rome. And all of this is painted in this really illusionistic manner. And you see all sorts of wonderful little details. Again, this is one of the things I love about Mantegna. So you will see some ladies looking down. You see a blue sky with clouds, some ladies looking down. You see some playful little putti. Putti are little angels, little naked angel babies. One of them has got their head stuck in the balustrade. If you've ever been around a toddler and a set of stairs, you know one of their favorite things is to stick their head through there. So it's very playful. You will also see randomly a peacock, and you will see a gentleman sort of wearing a turban, perhaps referencing Turkish people. We're in Mantova in northern Italy near Venice. So we have a lot of Turks and other people coming from North Africa into this part of Italy at this time. We have a very diverse culture in the Veneto in the Renaissance because of the Venetian port. So we see this evidence of the reality of the diversity of life in Renaissance Italy. And the last little detail that I love to point out is you see this kind of wooden stick that is set across the balustrade, and then there's a potted plant sitting on it. And the idea is that this is sort of a joke, that you would look up and it would look as if they're going to pull this stick out and this potted plant is going to fall on you. So we're down below, di sotto, looking up in su, di sotto in su, looking up at the ceiling. And in addition to this courtly scene that we have on the walls, we have this kind of playful, illusionistic painting on the ceiling. And what do you notice about the Camera Picta by Mantegna compared to the paintings that we've looked at so far by Masaccio and Leonardo da Vinci? Well, you will notice that we are looking at secular imagery. So we see in the early Renaissance the emergence of the private art market, private patrons, and secular, non-religious subject matter. This is portraiture, courtly scenes, and even playful, almost like jokes painted into the scenes. This has nothing to do with religion or spirituality at the time, and this is a key feature of Renaissance art. We see the rise of secular imagery. Now, speaking of secular imagery, you may have seen this painting before. This is Botticelli's Birth of Venus from 1484-1486. Here we see a depiction of figures from ancient Greek or Roman mythology. So who is Venus? In classical Greek mythology, she is referred to as Aphrodite, and the Romans call her Venus, the goddess of love and beauty. And here she is depicted standing in that Venus pudica, that kind of shy Venus pose, the modest Venus pose. She's covering her breasts and her genitalia, but otherwise she's pretty much exposed. She's got this long, billowing, kind of strawberry blonde hair that tells us a lot about 15th century beauty ideals in Florence. This pale skin and light hair was the ideal in Italy at the time. And some people say that Botticelli was supposedly in love with one of the daughters in the Medici family, and that he modeled a lot of his Venuses and his Madonnas on this one real life woman at the time. Now, what's the iconography? The subject matter here is secular. This is a story of the birth of Venus. How is she born? Her dad is a god. And basically, there's like another god that gets mad at him. I forget why. I think it's Uranus. Uranus gets his junk cut off. He's castrated. And his thingling is thrown into the sea. And then out of that comes some sea foam You know what I'm talking about? This is a metaphor, okay? This sea foam goes into this clam. You get it? And boom, out of this shell bursts Venus. She's born in the shell, and I don't know, she's born like age 20, perfect body, and she surfs on this shell into land. So this is the birth of Venus. She's flanked by some other deities. Here you will see to her right Zephyr. Do you see the guy with the nude torso and the blue billowing fabric, and he's blowing the wind? That's Zephyr, the god of the wind. And he has abducted Chlora, and he, through his wind, spreads those seeds around to create Flora, the goddess Flora of the flowers, who's wearing this flowered dress and carrying this billowy pink fabric that she's coming to bring to cover Venus so she can remain modest. This is another example of secular art. Remember, secular art is art that is non-religious in subject matter. So why were artists painting these, and why were patrons commissioning this kind of artwork? Now, I know this looks sort of elegant and refined to us, but I really urge you to think about these kinds of paintings almost being like softcore Renaissance porn. Like, it's not Pornhub, okay? It's not graphic. But these paintings were painted for these high status men to be placed in their studiolo. A studiolo is basically a library, or we might today call it a man cave, where these men, these noble men and these wealthy bankers who are the kind of the new rich, they would come together in these spaces and talk about their knowledge of classical Greece, talk about art, talk about politics. I don't know what they were doing in there, drinking wine and smoking cigars and enjoying looking at these paintings. Through these paintings, they could show off their knowledge of classical mythology, and they also had an excuse to look at a nice, naked, sexy lady. Paintings like Botticelli's Birth of Venus were destined for the studiolo of the wealthy Florentine banker. So the Italian elite classes in the 1400s and the 1500s were willing to spend a lot of money on art because art communicated social, political, and spiritual values. So think of it like cultural capital. And you have to remember that we are in Florence, also known as Firenze. The Italians call it Firenze. And you have to make sure that you understand that there is this family of bankers, the Medici, who are known for their international trade interests, and they have a lot of money. And they're getting money through usury. And remember that this is a mortal sin. So they think they can assuage their capitalist related guilt by patronizing the arts and spending money on religious art. And they're also consuming art for their own personal use that will hang in their private homes. So this consumption of art was used as a form of competition for social and political status. They wanted everyone to know that they paid for that fresco or that painting in that church. And when they invited their rich friends over to their houses, they wanted everyone to know, that's my artist, that's my Botticelli, And so artists started to become almost these status symbols. And they would patronize the secular arts for their own pleasure and again for that social status. We also see tied to this idea the rise of the individual. The sheer number of portraits painted during this era illustrates this focus on the individual. We also have this kind of growing interest in humanism and secularism despite the Christian context. We have people focusing on man's free will and that idea that the rewards for living excellently also came in this life. So these people were really, really rich, despite the fact that The majority of the population was hungry peasants, working class individuals, struggling day by day, living paycheck to paycheck, and you have this really small elite class of individuals. So it might be kind of relatable to our contemporary existence. We see that emphasis on individualism through the kind of portraiture that was popular in the early Italian Renaissance. Here we're looking at the portrait of the Duke and Duchess of Urbino, Battista Sforza, and Federico de Montefeltro. And you can see, first of all, by looking at the man in this red hat and suit, that he has a very particular nose. So this is not just a generic face, but this is exactly what this individual looks like. So he wants it to be known that this is him. So we see this emphasis on individualism. Now, next to the Duke, you see the Duchess. She looks very pale, and a lot of scholars say that actually this portrait was painted after she had passed. So perhaps this is sort of a funerary portrait. Perhaps this is why there's not a lot of life in her. You also see very pale skin of a woman being confined to the home, remaining indoors much of her life was the beauty ideal for 15th century Italy. You also see she's draped in rich clothing, embroidered sleeves, fabulous jewelry. She's got jewelry and a really complex hairstyle, jewelry in her hair and on her neck. All of this are indicators of her wealth and status. And beyond these two figures, you see this vast landscape, the land that the Duke and Duchess oversee. This is a very powerful statement about their power, wealth, and influence in 15th century Italy. So I hope you now understand these ideas about secular art and about portraiture and the rise of the individual in 15th century Italy. Stay tuned for more Art Trippin lecture series.